Next up is Karthik. Karthik actually helps organize DevOpsDays Austin, so he's got a little bit of a experience with this, I guess. You know, a lot of people don't think about, what's mental health got to do with DevOps. Actually, I think it's one of the biggest benefits of a shared responsibility type organization is that people aren't fixing other people's problems and so forth. I don't want to steal Karthik's talk from him, but it's an important talk. So with that, please welcome Karthik. I'm not going to butcher your last name, sorry.
No worries, man. Thank you. Thank you. All right, can folks hear me? Yes, sounds good. Oh, slides are up, that's awesome. I've been having some issues with my HDMI, so I'm just glad it worked. Hey folks, my name is Karthik Gaekwad. I put the slides online, bit.ly.com, DevOps-Burnout, in case people want to take a look later on. So I work for Oracle, but I'm not a DBA. I know some stuff about databases, but there's a lot of other folks at Oracle that can do DB stuff a lot better. I come from the cloud side of things, so I do a lot of stuff with Kubernetes and like containers and all of that. I'm a container native evangelist at Oracle Cloud, so if you want to talk about Kubernetes, that's like my bread and butter, so this talk is a little bit different from that. So like Ken mentioned, I'm from Austin, Texas, so I run DevOpsDays Austin over there. It happens in a couple of weeks from now. Also do a bunch of other stuff, Container Days, and then a bunch of meetups in Austin as well. I also have authored a couple of courses for cloud native stuff on LinkedIn Learning, if anybody's read that. But today, we're here to talk about this topic called burnout or mental health. And before I kind of go into it, I wanted to just kind of talk about like why I'm talking about this. And everyone here in the audience will have like a different journey to it, but my kind of journey to this was, like we all kind of work together, with other people, in teams, and we collaborate on doing a bunch of stuff. And a lot of times, you kind of hear like, oh, well, like people say, hey, I'm really burned out, I'm really tired. And like my mental model for this was like, well, it's just tired. Like go take a vacation, take a couple of days off, come back, and you'll feel better. And I didn't really like pay a lot of like close attention to it until like it happened to one of my like really favorite coworkers. Like he just went down like this downward spiral of, he was like really good, and then all of a sudden like things were just not going right, and then he like burned out pretty quickly after that. And I was talking to another friend of mine in December about some of this stuff, and he like ran a company, and it happened to one of his developers, and he was like, how do I recover from this, and like what do I need to put in place in terms of like as a leader, so that stuff like this, so we can kind of know a little bit more about things like this. So this talk idea kind of came about in December, and so that's kind of like my journey towards towards this. So in general, I was gonna kind of take a look at like what other communities do, and this idea is kind of like quote unquote new in the DevOps space. We don't talk about it a lot, but this is not like a new concept. It's kind of there all over the place. So I did a bunch of research with that. We are all engineers in the audience, and we love measurement. So I was like, how do you measure this thing? So there's a section on measurement, and then most importantly, like if there's things you can take out of this, like what you can do for yourself, and then what you can do for others, and as leaders, what we can do in our companies. So let's go to like what the heck this actually is, right? So first thing, any presentation you go to, they're like, we need a definition for this thing. So I was like, oh yeah, let me go find a definition. And the strangest thing is like there isn't a standard definition for what burnout is. And this kind of shocked me when I first found out. But a couple of ways folks talk about it is the Mayo Clinic has this. They say that burnout is a state of physical or emotional exhaustion, and it involves like a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity along the way. That one's really interesting. This other one that's interesting, it kind of comes from the doctor side of the house, and it's a loss of enthusiasm for work, feelings of cynicism, and a low sense of personal accomplishment. So a couple of themes that we see, that are similar between the two definitions. And the origin of this, like the initial kind of research that came about this was in the 1970s. There was a psychologist named Herbert Freudenberger, and he kind of like was doing a lot of research into why people are getting tired and just kind of disengaged from from work, so he kind of came up. He, coined the term, quote unquote. But it's basically used to describe like the consequence of you're like in a state of severe stress for a long period of time. And like initially, a lot of folks saw this in like helping professions, so like in doctors and teachers, etc. And folks kind of like helping each other to do stuff. So that's kind of where it originated from. And so we come back to the question: is this unique to DevOps? Like, not really. It's literally all over the place. So wanted to take a quick look to kind of talk about it in different industry verticals. And so sadly, it's very common outside of our sphere. One of the good things about it is that because it's so common, everybody kind of knows about it, and they kind of look at different symptoms about what happens, et cetera. And so you get a bigger kind of network of people to kind of help you out with. That's something that I think is missing in the DevOps sphere right now. So let's take a quick look at I put radiologists, teachers, police in here, but one of the best examples is from the medical field, and you kind of see this literally all over the place. So when you go into medical school, like 50% of medical students in school like experience burnout. And then there's like a 10% experience, and wanting to actually commit suicide. So pretty serious stuff. And then round 2 is when you're actually doing your residency. Once again, up time of like really high stress and needing to make decisions really quickly, et cetera. There in the study that I read about, 25 or 27 to 75% of folks are burned out at any given time. And then the third phase is when you're actually a doctor and you are in medical practice. 1 in 3 physicians say that they're feeling signs of being burned out. And I put a link in here. It's from like the Happy MD blog, and they did a bunch of studies related to this. So it's pretty interesting. Radiologists. So one of the things that radiologists do, they you can kind of think of them in terms of like operations engineers. So they're kind of like needing to churn out a bunch of stuff over and over again for physicians. So, and the work that they're doing, they're actually like reading X-rays and like doing a bunch of stuff associated with that. So it feels like really important work. So there's a lot of guilt when they're like, hey, I'm really tired, but I need to get the stuff that I need to get done for the day before the end of the day. And so they don't kind of like think about, am I really emotionally exhausted at that time? They're like, I just got to get this stuff done. And in a different study, they were saying 49% of radiologists are also burned out. And we talk about the effects and some of those things over here, and we'll cover some of that later. Also with teachers, this is pretty common. In an education survey that was done recently, they say, I think this was in either 2016 or 2014, I don't quite remember when, over 500,000 teachers quit or move every year. So, like I just have a newborn, and he'll go to school one day, and so like we always worry as parents like whether our kids will stay in school, but you're also kind of worried of like whether the teacher that is teaching him will also stay and continue to be an educator. A lot of this, as you might put the dots together, happens a lot with high poverty schools. And one of the biggest learnings that they had in this survey was this idea that teachers felt really stuck, like they weren't able to like take a step, and nothing they did was like good enough. So they were like, maybe I should just do something different. That kind of resonates with me because like you'll talk to folks on teams, et cetera, and you'll be like, man, like, I don't know, like, regardless of what I do, I'm, like, not making any progress in my technical world. So, like, I feel really stuck with what I'm doing. Maybe I should look for a different job. We kind of, see that in our industry as well. And from, like, a high-level society perspective, in the U.S., we're not as good about doing some of this stuff, but Europe is really good at, some of the studies that they have. And so this is from the Netherlands. So Netherlands has, like, this organization called Center for Statistics Netherlands, CBS. And so they started looking at their entire population. They were like, something's kind of going wrong. So they did a survey and some research. And so in 2017, they said that 16% of employees, between whatever ranges, were feeling some kind of work level fatigue. And the important thing here was like a few years ago, they had done the same thing and they realized, hey, this is kind of going up. So I think I have a chart in here. Yeah. So this is from the same study, and the light blue line is the most recent year, and the dark blue line is the year before. And basically, the light blue is more over time. So there's more concern of things getting worse over time as opposed to how they were before. Also, the most common factors for mental fatigue was either feeling really drained, waking up in the morning and you're like, I'm really tired, don't really want to be doing whatever I'm supposed to be doing. Emotionally exhausted, so you're like, you go home and you're kind of closed off from maybe your family, maybe your friends, and you're just like, I just need time for myself to get to the next day. Exhausted from work, so you go in tired, you leave tired, you're just kind of like tired the whole time. And like demanding work with other people, so it's like the work that you're doing might be really hard, but you're also like working with others, so like everything's kind of demanding in there. Once again, in that survey, it's like it was very skewed towards the right. So light blue, it got worse over time. So I started looking at like, okay, well, how do you actually measure this? Like, what can we start doing? So there's a bunch of different ways, and there's 3 ways that I kind of looked at. There's the Maslach burnout inventory, and we'll talk more about that in this talk because that's more relevant to our sector. There's also a job diagnostic scale, which is specific to like your work. So they do this for different jobs. And then there's the Utrecht work engagement scale, which is kind of the opposite. So Maslach and job diagnostic kind of look at how bad things are. Utrecht looks at how good things are. And if you have a low score, you kind of like look at it and say, hey, how do we make it better? The latter two are more related to jobs versus Maslach is like more about yourself. So let's take a look at dimensions. And dimensions, so this is a prior study. Take a look at Dr. Christina Maslach. She actually gave a talk at DevOps Enterprise Summit last year. Last year was 2018. Yeah, last year. And then Velocity in 2015 with John Alsbaugh, who's also been doing a lot of work in this sector. And really, like, go watch the talk. I'll just say that because it totally blew my mind. But she defines 3 dimensions for burnout. There's emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and personal efficacy. And so if you go into that a little bit more, emotional exhaustion is like, it's a thing in the mind. It's like, I'm really tired, and I'm like, I'm so tired of work, I don't really want to go into work. Or you're like, your weekend's there, you're like super elated Friday, or like Friday, because you have like 8 more hours to get to the weekend, and then you like absolutely hate Sunday because you're like, man, I gotta get back into work on Monday. There's also procrastination, and I started realizing this myself, where it's like I was doing everything like last minute, and you kind of defer stuff off sometimes, and sometimes like I lie to myself and say, hey, I work really good under pressure, so I'll like do the stuff later. But there might also be like a different factor over there where it's like, okay, well, I don't want to deal with this thing right now because I just need time for myself, and so I'll push it off later. So there's some of that. There's cynicism, right? And so cynicism, like, it kind of manifests itself in different ways. Some folks in the audience, like maybe for this talk, they'll be like, man, that's like a terrible talk. I could have done better, whatever. I say this a lot about Kubernetes talks. I'll go in there and be like, this is interesting. I could have done this better. And, sometimes people will be like, you'll go into a crowd and they'll be like bashing your company or whatever. You're like, yeah, my company sucks because blah, blah, blah. And we are so good at snark. It's really sad. Like, you look at Twitter, and, sometimes people will ask like a genuine question like, hey, I need help with something. And instead of like actually answering with like genuine response, they'll be like snark, snark, snark. I don't know why we've gotten so good at this, but like we're not being helpful to each other. Maybe it's the Twitter ecosystem. I don't know. Maybe it's technology, but something is just a little bit off. But that it gives you like an idea of like how we could become more cynical towards a lot of things. And finally, personal efficacy. It's some of this imposter syndrome kind of ties into some of this, where it's like, you start asking yourself like, hey, am I actually a good engineer, or am I just like faking to get to all of this stuff? Do I actually, know what I'm doing, or it's like I'm like I can try to hide away from stuff, and I'll kind of make it here and there. And we're also like super critical about ourselves. Like you might give a really good talk, you might have really good code, but you're always criticizing yourself, like, oh, I could have written more unit tests, or oh, this one module that's like called like 0.7% of the time, I could have optimized it a little bit better. So we're like hyper vigilant about what we did wrong, and not focusing on like, hey, in general this code works really well, or in general people love this talk, etc. So the actual measurement is called MBI, so measure of burnout, and this is from Christina Maslach, or Dr. Maslach, and so it takes all of those three dimensions. So it takes emotional exhaustion, cynicism, personal efficacy, and you kind of rate it on a scale from 0 to 6. 0 where it's like, yeah, I've never had any of those things I said about emotional exhaustion, or 6 where, yeah, well, I'm like thinking of this thing every single day, and it's on my mind. And so you can kind of chart it over time. So you can do this mental exercise with yourself and say, hey, if it's if you get a score of 5 or 6, you call that as a high score. And so if you're exhausted, you're cynical about everything, and your efficacy is really bad, there's a chance that you're like burning out with whatever you're doing. But there's, it might not be just one thing. You might have, or it might not be all three things. If it's just exhaustion, you might be suffering from exhaustion from the one end. If you're like very cynical about what you're doing, you might just be overextended at work. Like you might be getting a bunch of stuff to do, and you might not be getting anywhere. So you're getting cynical about the stuff that you're doing. Also, efficacy, if that's really high, there's a chance that you're being ineffective at a specific role, might want to change roles, etc. And if you're low on everything, like that's kind of like the dream place to be. That's where you're actually being productive, you're doing things that you're supposed to be doing, and you're kind of engaged as an employee or as a founder or whatever in your company. But yeah, so like when I looked at this, I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm like 2 out of 3. I'm not sure if I was like 3 out of 3, but this study actually like made me think about where I was on the spectrum, so to say. So what about like tech culture, right? So there's a lot of cultural stuff with different industries. Like how does tech kind of fit into a lot of this? So we talked about some of this where I don't know whether it's because we are, I don't know, maybe I'm like kind of saying this in a too broad scenario, but we end up having like self-doubt, whether that's because we're like very passionate about things we're doing, whether we're introverted, whatever it is, but like we have self-doubt. We also like love to doubt someone else. Like, why can't we just be happy for somebody doing whatever it is? Like, so we doubt others to be able to accomplish whatever they're trying to do. We've started to like really enjoy snark, which is I think a really bad thing. Also, with internalization of issues. So I do this a lot. I don't know how many folks in the audience do this as well, but like, if I end up having trouble with doing something specific at work, I'll be like, no, that's just me. I should work harder, and I can get there. Or I need to change something about myself, and I can fix this thing that I'm trying to do. And so, but it might not be like a problem with what we're doing. It might just be something that's going on with with the ecosystem. And we don't really listen. So a lot of times we'll have folks come to us, teammates, et cetera, that will want to vent about things, and we'll be like, no, man, you just gotta like tough through it. It'll be fine. Like we'll get to next weekend, and it'll be better. Like we don't actually listen to people's problems. So the most important section of this. Does any of this like actually resonate with folks? Like quick show of hands. Okay. Well, I hope we're not all burned out, because that would be really scary. But here, at least I give you some of my suggestions for it. So we'll look at 3 levels, self level for what you can do for yourself, what you can do for others. And we'll talk about institutional levels. If there are like managers in the room or people who can make decisions about organizations, we'll talk about that too. So a lot of folks are DevOps and Ops. So put out if this is a Sub 1, it might sound funny, but and I didn't know how to actually put the slide in, but if you're really struggling today, and if a lot of this is really eating at yourself, go see your primary care provider. There's a lot of options out there. We all work in technology. One of the best things about technology is we have health insurance, and our health insurance is typically really good. There's a lot of options for not just primary care providers, but you can also go talk to a therapist. Okay, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Go do it. It's actually a good thing. Take a leave of absence if you're really struggling at work and you're feeling super burned out. Just take a leave of absence. Your boss will understand, and if your boss doesn't understand, you can be like, "Hey man, I live in Seattle. There's plenty of other companies. Just go somewhere else." If y'all need a job, Oracle is hiring, come talk to me. I'll find y'all a gig. And it won't be databases either, I promise. But to be more serious, ask yourself these questions. Do you have a hobby, right? And so my hobby, I love to kayak. So I live in Austin. We have we have 2 lakes. Well, one is a fake lake, but anyways. So we have these 2 lakes. I go kayaking a lot. So I fit phase 1, but phase 2 I totally fail. I used to do that on a regular basis, twice a week, but I don't do that anymore. So I'm okay, well I got to do something a little bit better. Eat healthy. Don't eat McDonald's all the time. This is sad advice because I don't follow it myself. Look at my Twitter. I talked to some other folks about eating McDonald's. So I need to do some changes over there. Exercise on a regular basis releases endorphins, good for you. And this last thing might sound very holistic and weird. Do you meditate? So think about a way so you can kind of calm your mind down. So you're thinking about stuff that's just kind of being able to calm your mind over time. One thing the U.S. is great at is not taking vacation. This is from the study from USA Travel. They did the study where it's 705 million unused vacational days annually. So go take a vacation. It'll be good for you. And don't take, I don't know about other folks, but for me, when I take a vacation, I have to take a bunch of days off, a week, because it takes me 2 days to kind of stop thinking about work, and then actually enjoy time, and then come back refreshed. So don't just take the weekend and a Friday. Take a week. It helps over time. Some other stuff. So one thing that I don't know why we don't do this in technology, but we don't. It's okay to say no. When a lot of folks will come and ask me to do things, and I'm a people pleaser, so I'll be yeah, I'll help you out with that. One question to ask yourself is, are you doing something specific for the person because you like them, or it's actually helping you with your job or whatever? So think about that up front. And then figure out more ways to enjoy what you're doing versus doing something you really hate. So one interesting construct is okay, well, I really like doing, I really like to code, and I really like to write tests, but I don't like, debugging or something. That's probably a bad example. I should have thought of this a little bit beforehand, but if you really like coding and you hate talking to people, write more code and spend more time doing the things you love, so you actually get energy out of that. Also, as you kind of grow in your career, find a mentor, somebody you can kind of talk to, someone who's kind of been through the ropes, previously. This is one industry anecdote that I really like. So I found this from the doctor side of the thing, and so this kind of says, physical, emotional, spiritual. It ties really well to the MBI stuff, and so you have this bank that's that might have some level. So think of it as a tank. And so if you want to keep the tank over empty, because if you hit empty, you're kind of at a really bad spot. So from like figure out, measure how you're actually doing in all of the 3 areas. From the 3 areas, try to figure out how you can, limit the damage or like decrease the drain. And also increase the deposits for each of those things. So I wish I had my notes on here, but so like I said before, if there are things that you really enjoy doing, try to do more of those because it helps you kind of put stuff back. Oh yeah, I do remember. So from a tech point of view, like all of us came into technology because we like doing something very specific, right? So the doctor analogy here was figure out why you became a doctor and try and like get those opportunities to talk to patients that told you like, hey, this is why I came here or whatever, because that gives you like a lot more energy from a spiritual level. In this interesting anecdote, in the medical world, doctors who had read more fiction were more empathetic because they were able to connect with patients better. Also, 1 book a month fell by like 19% on the emotional exhaustion stuff. So that was pretty interesting to me. If you're trying to like help out others, so if you feel okay, but if you see somebody really struggling, they come to you, they confide in you, be there for your peers. We're kind of all in this together. So we're all like one big team, regardless of what company we work for, etc. Learn to empathize and like kind of walk in their shoes at least before you start judging them for, judging them. Other industries are really a lot better at listening than we are in technology. So that's like something that we should take in our book. But I think it's also some of the stuff that we do that we just don't, because this is newer to us, we don't realize it. From an organizational perspective, I read this anecdote about babies floating down the stream. Like you're taking a walk in the park or like near a stream, and then you see like a baby in the water, and you're like, holy shit, there's a baby in the water. I need to go like get this baby out of there. And so you go, like you take the kid out, and you put him or her on the bank, and then again, like you see another baby, another baby, another baby, and you're like, what the heck? And then like somebody, and you try and get all your friends to help out, and everybody in the park is like helping you out, and then like 2 people run off, and you're like, where the hell are you running off to? We need help to get all these kids out of the water. And then they're like, we're running upstream to figure out what the root cause is for this, or like whether there's people actually putting kids in the water or whatever. So this might sound funny, but like operationally, right? We have like, all of us, might have had a pager right now or before, whatever, and we're all like, trying to fix the problem as quick as possible. It's a production issue, but there might be issues with your actual code that you're running. So if you're a VP or something like that, like take a look at the development side of the house, take a look at the product side of the house, because there might be issues there. So fix stuff upstream. Like don't always be really good downstream. So where do we go from here? I think I'm almost out of time. Take a look. I have a minute. Sweet. I'm finished on time. Sincerely, like take a look at some of Dr. Maslach's work. She has a couple of talks, like I mentioned before. The DevOps Enterprise Summit talk is on YouTube, so go just check that out. Really interesting, like a lot of interesting stuff from there. She's also looking for folks that are, in tech, kind of walking through scenarios, because they're trying to get more information about how technology deals with a lot of the stuff. So you can actually reach out to her too, which is pretty neat. And then I just have, this talk was more about like talking about a bunch of different things that, I've looked up and researched. So there's an appendix for you. And with that, I don't think I have time for questions, but I'm happy to chat. All right, thank you all.
Thanks, Karthik.